everybody. Hello and welcome to the Scholars of Finance National Speaker Series. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hope that all of you have been safe and healthy. I'm Ross Overline. For anyone here that doesn't know me or hasn't met me, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Scholars of Finance, and I will be your host for today's fireside chat and Q&A with Matthew Collier and Tony Paquette. We are honored to have these two leaders with us today. And just to share a little bit of context and background, Matthew and Tony have actually been two very close mentors of mine during my time in San Francisco since I've lived here over the last couple of years, and have been incredibly influential in the success of Scholars of Finance so far. They've both become dear friends personally and have helped me grow immensely, coaching me through challenging situations, helping me see and seize opportunities, offering me feedback and helping me grow. And they both even helped me make my decision to take the leap to lead Scholars of Finance full time and jump into this startup. And today, Matthew and Tony are on the advisory board of Scholars of Finance. They're both donors to our organization and support us philanthropically, are very generous with our group, and have also helped us ultimately achieve our success so far, making a number of introductions and helping guide the development of our programs and strategy. Fortunately for us, over the next hour, they will share how to be excellent mentors, how to be a great mentee, how to source and build life-changing relationships with mentors and mentees, and how important mentorship is during times of crisis like we're in today. So we'll begin by hearing from Matt and Tony a little bit. We'll have a fireside chat. I'll have a conversation with them, have some prepared questions, and then we will open it up to Q&A with you, the audience, as always. Students, per usual, if you have a question that comes up, please raise your hand in Zoom. After doing this, you'll be added to a queue. Once you're called on, you'll simply unmute your line, introduce yourself, and ask your question. We normally host events in person, so we want to encourage everyone right now, if your video is not already on, to turn your video on. Tony and Matt can see a lot of you in gallery view, and we'll also give them a warm welcome. So I'm sure they'd love to see you and say hello. So with that, and also be prepared to unmute your mic. So I'll share a little bit about Matthew and Tony, and then I'll turn it over to them to each get us started with some opening remarks. And Matt, I'll start with you. We'll go in alphabetical order. So Matthew is currently a founding partner of Ramp Catalyst Network, as well as the acting senior advisor to Yellowstone Holdings. In 2014, Matthew joined Accenture as the head of global health strategy practice, and later moved over to stand up a new practice within the firm focused on the convergence of industries into health. Prior to joining Accenture, Matt was a partner at Bain & Company, where he developed and led Bain's global medtech growth initiative from nascent to market leading in 5 years, and drove the growth of their APAC health practice from Shanghai in 2011 to 2014. Prior to his stint at Bain, he spent a decade as a serial CEO, running 3 privately backed companies and sitting on 4 boards in the medtech, pharma, and health services sectors. Matt originally developed his passion for healthcare while at McKinsey, where he spent 5 years working across the payer provider, pharma, and medtech sectors as well. Matthew earned his Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Stanford University and an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. And I'll shift over to Tony and share a little bit about Tony as well. Tony Paquette is currently a business unit leader at the financial technology company SoFi in San Francisco. In this role, he's responsible for managing treasury, market risk, financial and regulatory operations, and international businesses for the company. Prior to joining SoFi, Tony was at JPMorgan Chase in New York City, where he was most recently managing director and the global head of funding and liability management for the company. Prior to this, he's held portfolio management roles in the Chief Investment Office at JP Morgan and in the Treasury and Corporate Investments Department at Bank of America. He began his career as a research analyst covering the technology sector at Goldman Sachs. In addition to serving in formal leadership roles, Tony has been a consistent member of committees and organizations supporting employee recruiting, leadership training, corporate and cultural development, and military veterans affairs. Tony earned his BA from Brown University and sits on the President's Advisory Council on Athletics for the university. So with that, in standard Scholars of Finance fashion, I'll ask everybody on the line to unmute your mic, and please join us in giving Matthew and Tony a warm round of applause and a welcome. And thank you so much. And with that, Matt, I'll turn it over to you first. Would love it if you could just share a bit about the arc of your story and career and how mentorship has played a role in your success.
Sure would. Thank you very much, Ross. That was a really nice and warm and perhaps undeserved introduction. So I don't know if I told you, I actually just this last week accepted a new position. So now it's back into the fray as a CEO again of Sutherland Global Health. So the ever turning tale of a career continues. And
Congratulations.
I'd like to welcome all of you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to you and talk to you about one of my favorite topics. I'm doing it today, coming to you from a small cabin in the woods in Virginia and sporting my ever expanding COVID hairdo, which pretty soon it's going to take up the rest of the screen, I think. I think when it comes to mentorship, I would argue it's been one of the most important and memorable factors in my life. It's not only been important from the standpoint of what has contributed to the arc of my life, but the memories and the valued exchanges and the warm feelings that and the sense of place that come with it have been rewarding in a way that goes far beyond the business and day-to-day activities. For me, it started, like I would imagine it does for many of us, in exposure to the adults of your life when you're a child, particularly coaches. And I would argue there, the ones that really set themselves apart from others who had a senior role to you in life were those that really delved deep and shared with you more of life's lessons. So yes, I was a runner, so a coach taught me how to run around in circles in an ever faster way. But at the end of the day, what I really learned from that man was how to live a life of meaning, how to take care of myself and take care of others. And it's that ability of a mentor to stretch beyond the topic at hand that I think is so very valuable. The second, I go to my first real job and a great manager named Dave Chan. And I think he gave me one of the next real insights you get from mentors. So yes, the mentor can be a broad lifespan or life experience wide input, but he also really taught me to see behind the curtain, to see the full view of what was going on. Because particularly when you're junior, you can have a discussion with a boss that comes at you from left field and you don't really know why. Or as I've had a chat with one of you on the line here recently, a chat with a new potential girlfriend and not really understanding the dynamics of what's underlying that discussion you just had with them. Yes, Ross is raising his hand. And so one of the advantages of mentors as well is they've been around the block a few times, right? They can see around the corners, but they can also read into situations and really help to provide you a full picture of what you're dealing with in a way that you might not have thought of given your experience. I moved forward a number of years to a post-marriage father-in-law, and he really taught me, I think, mostly what it meant to be a good mentee. He was such an effective, he was a serial CEO, a great and wise man, taught me a lot that you'd imagine mentors do. But I remember one day he actually pulled me aside and said, you know, Matt, please forgive the gender association here. This could be any gender, but this was our dialogue. He said, you give good son. And what he meant by that was that I knew how to enter a relationship with him that was rich and giving on both sides and inspired him to give more in the mentor role because I was giving much in the relationship as well. And as he put it, you give good son. If you think about that father-son or mother-daughter, father-daughter, you name the gender relationship, it is a very rich, nuanced relationship. And you really need to flex your EQ to build it and to nurture it. But it's incredibly valuable when you do, and you will find that's perhaps one of the most effective tools to expand and build your mentoring relationships. And I would say now, you know, pretty senior in the career. I think actually Ross let me go first because I'm a little older than Tony. He was worried I might not make it through the whole hour. But the relationships I have now, I think of Kaveh Safave, who's the global head of health at Accenture, or Sue Siegel, who was the chief innovation officer at GE and now is doing just spectacular things that unfortunately I can't tell you about because they're a little secret. But those two, I would say at this point in my career, and don't worry, this won't add up to 100%, but it's kind of half therapy, half insight, and half challenge. They're people I respect so much where every time I talk to them, I come away having learned something new. And they're not afraid at all to challenge me on the archetypes I've built around myself and my views, and forcing me to see it from different angles. So even very advanced in your career, mentorship can be tremendously valuable as a gift from somebody providing that to you. And then we can talk a bit more later about how along that same arc, I really loved the opportunity, and I get a tremendous amount out of now of being a mentor for those that are a little younger and looking to learn as well, and perhaps benefit from some of the extra circles around the track that I've had.
Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate it. That notion of giving good son, or you give good daughter. That's something I definitely want to dive into later. I think that there's a lot there to unpack. And I think that touches on something that's typified my own mentorship relationships that have been most impactful. I'm excited to come back to that. With that, Tony, would love to turn it over to you to say hello and share some of your opening remarks and thoughts as well.
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Matt, for going first and breaking the ice. It's really, first of all, thank you all for being a part of this organization, giving your time, your effort. It's great to see so many faces. Bit of a new world for those of us who are used to doing this in person, and there's probably some permanence to what we're dealing with. So so glad to be engaged. Yeah, similarly to Matt, and he mentioned a number of things that, frankly, I was taking notes while he was speaking, really resonate for me, just in terms of the, as we say, arc of life, or as a mentee and as a mentor. And those things are incredibly interconnected, is what I've found through time. And I think one thing I think we'll probably get into a little bit later is the reward factor on both ends of that spectrum, being a mentee and being a mentor, is actually equal or stronger depending on the time and at a certain point in your life. And I feel like I'm there right now. You are both. And so you end up acting as both. But one thing that if I go back and just thinking about the concept, it starts with deep relationships, obviously. And there's, the first formative relationships that many of us have are with parents or family members. And I will say that, I'll give an example. My relationship with my father, who I would say is was my first and probably still my, one of my primary mentors. That relationship was probably not as much mentor until I got well into my adulthood, or me as a mentee, I should say. But as I think back, that's a pretty formative one. I always played organized sports growing up and through high school and through college. And so, one of the things Matt mentioned was coaches. Coaches have depending on what activity, sport, or whatever you're engaged in, can have a material impact on your life. Obviously, you tend to do organized sports, team sports, or individual at a young age where you're very impressionable. And coaches are sort of trained in many ways to push you, usually in the sport and the field that you're in, athletically, to barriers or to places well beyond what you think is capable. I think mentorship in many ways, that's true, whether it be, work or relationships or other. And so, I start with those two because oftentimes the term mentorship, and if you pick up a book or even the way a lot of you are thinking about it now, is often kind of narrowly defined in this career setting. I will say I've been fortunate to have some incredible career mentors in my time starting from jobs I had before actually graduating college, through my first jobs on Wall Street and through finance. And I would tell you, I ironically actually took, and I didn't tell you this, Ross, I don't think any of them have signed up, but I sent the invite for this event to each of my mentors. And I said, I'm going to be talking tonight, and I'm going to be talking about, people who've had an impact on my life. So if your ears are burning, you'll know why. These people have become, and we talked a little bit about this in the pre-setup, so we can find the right section to talk about it. But I found the most impactful mentors in my life have gone from some official or tangential relationship to something that is very, very deeply personal. And it doesn't always have to be like that. I think there are mentors, and I've been a mentor myself in sort of relationships that come in and out. But the ones that have had the most impact in my life are those that I now consider friends. Many of them have been, or a few of them have been bosses at a point in time, but have, transitioned, and I either no longer work for them or have done something different in my career. And so, those are the things that I kind of think about. And then, getting back to one comment from earlier is, the ability to give back, and the willingness, and the value that I get out of being a mentor now it probably dwarfs any of the mentee benefits that I got, going through the early, stages of my time. So, there's a lot of different areas I think that we could probably dive into, but it's, it's a pleasure to be here to talk about this topic. I think I appreciate, Ross's opening comments as well. He's got a story to tell on how to find mentors himself. And you might want to, give a 2 cents on how you've done that yourself, because I think you've done a good job. But anyway, yeah, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on the spot. I was like, oh no, here come all the personal details from our mentorship meetings. Thanks, Tony. Thanks. I really appreciate it. I think it's this notion of a mentor becoming a friend is really interesting. To take you up on your invitation, I'm happy to share a little bit. Maybe I can even just speak to how I met each of you in brief as examples, and I can kind of talk through my understanding of how to find mentors. And I think it's probably a good, it's one of the questions that we've seen from a lot of students pre-submitted that we can jump into. I mean, I remember Matt, when we first met, it was actually a mutual friend invited me to stop by a dinner on a Friday night, and you were there. And we all had a great conversation, a wonderful conversation. Went to your place, had a glass of wine. And I remember during the evening, I was floored. Not to flatter you, but frankly, it was like your intelligence, you're very articulate. And I remember just discreetly thinking, he sees so much more complexity in everything than I currently see. He sees so much more in every topic we discuss. I want that superpower. I want to know how to see as much as you see. And so I had said, hey, would you be open to just connecting again sometime? I'd love to ask you some questions. And you said yes. And then we met once, and I sent you some material in advance, tried to respect your time. It went from there. I remember Tony at work. This is a funny story. This was at work. So Tony's a work mentor initially. Tony, you joined the company, also happened to be from the same state. We also happened to look strikingly similar. So for everyone here, funny story, when Tony Paquette joined SoFi shortly after me, a bunch of people came up to me and said, Ross, there's this guy that just joined Tony. He looks like he could be your father. He looks like a 20-year-old version of you. And I literally had the same joke from several people. And I just went up to, I remember seeing Tony in a number of meetings after that and being like, first, yeah, he probably could. He does. But number two, more importantly, I remember thinking, like, Tony spoke with so much poise and with so much conviction. And Tony also was very considerate. Like, Tony was the type of person where when he spoke, people just listened. And generally, it was a very balanced view, and it was a very high stakes environment. And I remember thinking, I want to learn from that. So I went over to Tony at his desk one day and said, Mr. Paquette, I'm Ross Overline. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. I've had a few people joke that you could be my dad. I don't know if you've got anything from that about that yet. And I just asked if I could take him to lunch. Would you be open to a quick lunch just for me to learn a bit about your background and ask you a few questions?
So I got to bust your chops on that one a little bit just because you brought it up. So that was a little weird. Okay. You can imagine he's called me Mr. Paquette, and then he said, I was like, all right, hold on, man. Like, what do you do? What's going on? And so, but what's funny about it, and I was thinking about, comments for this and things to think about, getting back to my prior, and you've done it in a unique way, as you just described. One of the things I think is important when you're sort of seeking a mentor, I know there was a bunch of questions on how do you kind of find, I think first it's about, searching for common ground, or kind of defining what it is that you're looking for. And then, at some point you do a little research on whether it's an individual or a group or a person, and mentoring doesn't need to be just a single individual. But then it's about establishing common ground, right? I mean, that's personal relationships, and this isn't unique to mentorship. But I've found that that's really important. And, it's funny because the first thing you said when you came up is you're like, from Minnesota and this and that. And I'm like, okay, so there's common ground here, but like, we still don't know each other.
Right.
But like, that's part of it, right? Then you get to know each other, and the relationship evolves. But anyway, so.
Yeah.
You know, it strikes me that a mentorship relationship is a very human relationship, right? It's like any other human relationship. It's like meeting and developing a friendship. It's meeting and developing a amorous relationship. The introduction of that takes a little bit of courage, right? Think about the last time you asked somebody out that you were attracted to. And it reminds me of an old saying that somebody once told me that I have found to be absolutely true in spades. And that is that in life, you only have to be courageous 5 minutes at a time. That you just, those magic moments, asking that right person out on a date, going and approaching Tony to have him be a mentee or mentor, taking the courage to actually put yourself out there a bit. And frankly, Ross, you essentially asked me out after that one evening. I recall that. Now, it's also important to realize that the EQ rules of don't be creepy apply here as well, right? That, as Tony just said, right, it was, I think your approach to him was perhaps just bordering on the, I'm not sure I'm going to say yes to this. But that you did do enough of the earnestness and establishing the connectivity to make it work. And I think that if you view it as that very real relationship, you're going to look for somebody where you feel a simpatico, because you have to have that a little bit of common ground to begin with, that simpatico that makes it seem a bit natural for you to actually lean in and ask for that coffee, ask for that lunch. And you don't want to overplay it, right? That initial ask is just, hey, I was really loving what you said in that meeting today. It just really struck home when you said ... And by the way, that little subtlety of referencing exactly what they said is really important, because it shows you paid attention. And one of the things that a mentor absolutely wants is to know that you're paying attention and that you're going to act on those things that you learn from them, right? That's actually the heart and soul of the equation of mentorship. And so that gives you an offering then to actually have the coffee and then build from there, right? These relationships start small and then over time build big.
Right. It's interesting, and it poses a question for me, at least, and I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on this briefly. You know, if someone that's a senior leader, right, who one of these scholars of finance students are going to ask for mentorship, that's probably a very frequent ask, I would imagine. You have a lot of people ask to grab coffee, grab lunch, and at some point you become oversubscribed. Any other tips that you might offer to make that ask stand out, right? As you've referenced, I go so far as to make it almost just borderline of standing out too much. What are some ways to tactfully stand out making that ask?
You know, what's interesting is it's a Laffer curve of asks. When you're very young and junior, nobody asks you because they don't think they're going to learn much from you. And in the middle of your career, you actually do get asked quite a bit, because you're the wonderful combination of respected, effective, and yet still more approachable. And then when you get more senior, actually the asks really trail off. And so oddly, if you go ask the CEO of your corporation, likely he hasn't had some young person like you asking him in quite a long time, or her. And you'd be surprised that, frankly, if it's the type of person you would want to be a mentor, i.e. somebody that's going to invest heavily in you, they get a lot out of this. Remember that mentorship is a two-way street. You know, I think here, when a while ago, Ross, you were talking to me about the challenges of how do you go out and ask for money to raise money for scholars of finance on donations? And I said, well, you're viewing it 180 degrees wrong. You're viewing it as an ask to them. You have to believe that you're actually offering them something. You're offering them the chance to invest in something. And if you can't wrap your head around that, well, then you don't believe in what you're offering, and you should probably walk away. But once you wrap your head around that, it really empowers you. And it's the same thing with a mentoring relationship. I value the mentee relationships I have today as much, or frankly, in some cases more, than I did the mentor relationships I had when I was much younger. So, you know, I'd say you'd be surprised how, particularly when these folks get senior, they don't actually get asked, by young people anyway, very often, but they value that ask.
Right. Tony, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would add, you know, a couple things as you're searching for mentors, or searching is maybe not, but as you're thinking about it, you know, I would say cast the net wide, but not too wide. And what I mean is, you want diversity of input from your kind of cast of people that you trust and take counsel from. But recognizing that each person and each relationship is going to be at a very different pace based on what's going on in their lives, their careers, and just the nature of the developing the relationship. I mean, these are pretty basic things, but they apply to, personal relationships, romantic relationships in a lot of ways, friends, family, but, be clear, be humble, be direct. It's hard to say this without giving, but like, be able to read and take cues, right? Sometimes, this is the EQ that Matt's talked about a few times. There are ways to develop. EQ is a skill. It is very developable, and you have to be able to read and understand that not everybody's going to think like you. They're going to be on different timelines. But one thing that is common is, or if you're going to find commonality with a mentor, they're going to appreciate some level of directness. Like, do you have time for me? And if not, it's okay. Like, it's not about always giving them an out, but trying not to dance around issues. I would say bring relevant content to the discussion, right? I mean, one of the things I've done, and I've really developed this with friendships as much as mentor and mentee relationships, is, if you read or see something interesting or hear of a story or whatever that might be relevant and in some cases specific to that individual, send them a tailored note, right? Like, you don't necessarily need anything in return, but it's like, hey, saw this, thought you might think it's relevant, and don't write them a whole 20-page thing, but like, here's why it might be relevant. Share it, right? It tells, to Matt's point, it demonstrates that you're paying attention. I can tell you, as I've tried to proactively develop a few mentor relationships with particularly senior people in organizations, as Matt alluded to, they're going to be in high demand for, a period of time, whether it's, the CEO of a company or very senior leaders. One of the things I've done is I'll send content, and you'll see, like, whether it's email or text or whatever your favorite form is, like, they'll respond to the stuff that's relevant. And then you take notes. You're like, okay, the person responded to this, right? I mean, these are basic points of reference, but like, pay attention, right? Oh, okay, this person was interested in that. Have a sense for how frequently or how often or how direct is too direct, right? Sometimes there's that, that borderline. And again, a lot of this is just the human aspect of understanding who you're dealing with. I would say, like a lot of things, do some research, right? Particularly if it's a work-related thing or somebody who is not in a direct introduction sphere. I mean, sometimes, let's go there. Some of the mentors I've found are people who were introduced to me through other respected folks that I know. Interestingly, there's something that I think of as sort of a mentor network. This gets to, a different point in life and in career. But for me, I distinctly remember a point where one of my now mentors introduced me to a different one of my now mentors. And it's like, okay, so now there's a common connection with more than one person, and I'm managing a couple of different relationships. And then I introduced them to at least one or two other people that are in my network. And it's like, okay, whether we all have something in common or not, that's kind of interesting. And it expands and deepens the relationships in different ways. So I know that's a little bit further along in the, once you've built kind of this mentor network, but, in the early stages, I wouldn't, frankly, I'd be careful. That's not the right word. I would be cautious in saying, like, you don't have to stand out, right? This isn't about winning, acceptance to all the wonderful schools that you're now into, right? I mean, these are human beings, and these are human relationships. So, you have to kind of respect that natural evolution that is there either is something or there isn't. You have to be honest. And as I said, humble. And if somebody's, fair to you and says, look, I'm interested, but I don't have time, that's fine. Like, take note take note and come back later or whatever it is. And then look, the other thing is, not everybody's set up to be a mentor. There's a lot of people in business, in life, in sports, and, in the world that you might see on TV or whatever and say, oh, I love the way that person speaks or talks or does this or whatever. I want them as a mentor. And then, either you find out a little bit more about their off-screen personality or out of the office or whatever it is, or, when you do approach them, they literally don't appear to be the same person. Like, take note, right? Those aren't necessarily the people that, at least for me, that I would want as mentors. I mean, there's always something to be said for wanting to achieve excellence and following in the footsteps. But look, not every CEO and not every great sports star or whatever is cut out to be a mentor. And so you kind of, I say cast a wide net, but not too wide. I would also say be selective, right? Be selective and figure out who you are, who you want to model yourself after, understand as much as you can about their holistic person, and then approach them in a humble way. And I think that is enough. Right. And if you're honest about it, that works.
Right. Yeah. I'll build on that, Tony, this notion of casting a wide net and then being selective. One thing that both of you have taught me a bit about, and that I've just developed and learned over time, is to have a set of criteria. Like, what is it that you want in a mentor? What typifies what you want in a mentor? For me, it's oftentimes someone who I want to emulate, right? Who has robust or relevant experience, who in that first meeting or that second meeting demonstrates that they care, who have a life or qualities you want. For me personally, and I want to have a healthy relationship, a family. I want to have a successful career. I want to have a social life. I want balance, right? So I don't ask the person that works 100 hours a week and has none of those things for mentorship, frankly. Maybe for career advice and some career input, but I try to look for someone who has everything I'm looking for, someone who's honest and direct, like you mentioned, and also pertinent to scholars of finance, somebody who, whether it's explicitly stated or you intuit it, utilizing EQ, you get a sense that they have a strong moral center, values, they're living their life by principles that you also want to share. And I've definitely had some, first coffee with somebody or first lunch with someone, who are, to use the dating analogy, who I'm courting as a potential mentor. And there are a few comments that are made in that first meeting that throw up some red flags. Maybe something that's very inflammatory or something I view as low integrity, and say to myself, I don't know if this is someone I want to learn from. So I think having that list and having that set of criteria, knowing who you want to be, I think for all of our students, think about the leadership development program you go through. You go through this exercise of visualizing the leader you'll become and how to get there. Well, when you have that list of values or principles, that life you'd like to have as a high integrity leader, look for people who represent that or who you think represent that. Matt, curious to hear what your thoughts are on the selection.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that I would build on that to say that it's really important to find somebody that's operating from a place of humility and authenticity. And frankly, when you're looking way up the corporate ladder, I'll admit all too often it may be hard to see some of those people. And Tony, you alluded to it a little bit. Some of these folks have amazing stage persona, but that's really where it is. And they may not have they may not be operating with you from a standpoint of openness and authenticity. And the reality is, if they're not doing that, if you're just getting the stage presence, you're really not going to get to the heart of matters where you're really going to learn. And I always find that some of the greatest wellsprings for me in giving advice in a mentoring relationship come from my most difficult moments. And it's having the ability to share those, right, and open up about those that become a really powerful communication tool between both of you. And I think it's also worth just thinking for a moment, why do you want to mentor? What are the things you really get out of it? And I always think of it as it's kind of 5+1. There's one is this point we talked about of getting a proper read, seeing behind the curtain, getting the whole view, right? It's seeing the depth and complexity of what's really going on, not just on the surface of what you think you heard. 2, it's the ability to look around corners, right? One thing that time has a wonderful thing of providing for us and experience is pattern recognition. We've seen these journeys and movie clips before, and we can see where they're going. So a mentor can really help you see what the implications are 2, 3, 4 steps down the road. 3rd is, I would say, crafting subtle tactics in life, right? It's one thing to be authentic. It's another thing actually to be effective. and they don't always go hand in hand. It's like we all, I'm sure, have had friends, and some of us may have fallen in this to ourselves, where we say, you know, I'm angry, I'm being authentic and expressing my anger. Well, actually, because you're angry doesn't mean you have to express it. Being effective is actually owning your emotions, yes, but also mastering them a bit as well. And the third thing is playing the long ball. They can really help you play the chess game a few pieces out. And the final of the 5 is, I'd say, holding up the mirror to you. It's really important to have a mentor that's going to challenge you. You know, you'll be telling a story about something that happened and they'll say, whoa, stop. Let's dig into why you did that. And then that mirror holding up is a really powerful tool. You can't be afraid in a mentoring relationship to be challenged and be uncomfortable. That's actually where you're going to learn the most. And the +1, the reason I call it a +1 is because it's not really mentorship and it's a separate thing, but sponsorship, the connecting to opportunity, the lifting up, the pushing forward. That's something that's really valuable, but I'd encourage you, it often gets conflated with mentorship. I'd encourage you to think of it as a separate thing of sponsorship, that the two don't always go together.
Yeah, I'll just kind of echo or build on one point on being prepared and recognizing that as a mentee, the best mentorship relationships often are from those who can challenge you, tell you the truth, and oftentimes the hard truth. You know, in sport, and this is why I use that analogy, you know, coaches are, different coaches have different styles, right? And I've, you know, there are some wonderful coaches you can read about. I would certainly recommend reading, if you like basketball or even not. John Wooden is just a legendary UCLA basketball coach. And, you know, his books books written about him are on leadership. But if you dig deep, they are as much about mentorship and to some degree sponsorship. And Matt, you know, alludes to the point that is right. Those are different things. And so I'm not trying to conflate, but I would say leadership and mentorship have a lot of overlap, and understanding, you know, the nature of what you're looking for, or whether you're looking for it or not, you will realize at a point in time, and you'll get to a point in life and realize sometimes, wow, I never thought of that person as a mentor, but that's exactly what they were, because they told me the hard truth. And, you know, sometimes that's only in hindsight. And then so I have recategorized people in my own life and career as mentors that at the time I didn't think of as such. Right. And so in what I have handled it differently, and, you know, sometimes you move on and relationships fade, maybe, but I'm saying it to you because, you know, when you're young in a career and life, those hardships or those hard truths, they're often hard to accept, but they're very real. They will come. And importantly, as Matt said, like, these are people who have been through different things, right? Whether it's, you know, job related, personal related, family loss, kids, you know, money hardships. I mean, these are real situations that many of you will confront in different points. And having somebody that can both lift you up but then keep you humble is sort of the definition of a mentor in many ways. But it's trust, you know. And so the other element that I haven't mentioned, or at least I haven't said the word, like, I think mentorship requires very much a two-way level of trust. That to me, that word requires time to build. And I think, you know, as you're approaching any relationship, mentor type relationship, to appreciate that for most people, as they say, trust takes 20 years to build and an instant to break. Yeah, that's true. But it's very hard to, and because the first part of it's true, it's very hard to establish it immediately. So, you know, if you think about building a trusting relationship, it's repetition, it's consistency, it's humility, it's honesty, it's definitely vulnerability, right? It's to Matt's point, it's being willing at some point to share your toughest moments and help learn from them. You know, again, I'll go back and not to contradict myself, sharing your most vulnerable open moment on your first coffee meeting, that's like, that can be weird, right? So like these things take time to develop. And so there's no perfect playbook. I would argue that each, you know, there's definitely not a one size fits all for mentorship relationships. I have what I would consider 5 to 6 really deep and strong ones. They're all unique. And then there's, kind of the next category of people who are in the sphere, but all those real emotional things are a part of it. And then there's, then there's just the real content of, who you want to be and who you want to emulate.
Right.
I love that. I think you're dead on. And I would also say we're talking a lot about what you get out of it as a mentee. But again, in line with Scholars of Finance, there's a big pay it forward component of it, and why, frankly, even now with junior people at your school, freshmen, right? You should start looking for mentoring relationships where you're the mentor as well, right? And the fact is, not only is that the right thing to do, it's the whole life benefit thing to do, but it's also, you're going to get a lot out of it. I think back to this one guy, Pete, I won't give you his last name, but he was a senior manager at Bain when I was a senior partner, and he was just a fantastic guy and a mentee of mine. And I was trying to coach him through to make it over that final last 10 yards to get to the touchdown of partner at Bain. And he just stops me and he says, Matt, why? Why would I want to be a partner? Why do I want to be like you? Your life is shit. You work all the time. You travel all the time. You're unhealthy, gaining weight, and your relationship with your wife sucks. Why would I be you? I'm not convinced I want to sign up for that. And I'll tell you, that moment right there led to the fact that I got far more out of that mentee relationship than he ever got out of it from me being the mentor. It really changed my mindset and made me realize that actually we all live under I would say it's the mandate to live an aspirational life. If you can't live it, how are you going to guide other people to it? And to really live that whole and balanced life and the aspirational life. And that, to me, came from a mentee, not a mentor. So again, recognize this is a full circular, synergistic relationship that you should always be in both sides of in your life, whether you're from the youngest point in your career to the oldest point.
Right. Yeah, Matt, I appreciate that. I'm glad that we had met after you heard that reverse feedback and resolved some of those things. I mean, this kind of segues nicely into a question. We've kind of already answered it to a degree that we had a lot of students pre-submit. And before I ask, I just want to let everyone on the line know that we'll be transitioning into audience Q&A soon. So if you have questions building up, if you want to introduce yourself and ask, use the raise hand feature so we can start building up that queue and get to you at the time that we have left. But with that, what I want to shift into just quickly is we can touch a little bit more on this art form, right? There's not one size fits all, Tony, as you had said. This art form of being emotionally intelligent and going from that first meeting that can often be very professional, guards up, shallow, topical in nature, to what you're both talking about, which suddenly become these deep, vulnerable relationships where you're very open, you're very honest, right? I've called both of you in very, very challenging points in my life for feedback and advice, for support and encouragement. But can you talk a little bit about your experience going from point A to point Z in that? And how do you read the person along the way early on? How do you build that up, and kind of how do you take those risks and take those leaps and not be weird, like not push the person away?
Yeah, I guess I'll try and take the first crack. I'm trying to think of examples that I can use. Well, here's one. So one of my bosses relatively early in my career, that I had moved down to Charlotte. I was in New York. I moved down to Charlotte to work for who was the chief investment officer of Bank of America at the time. And, he was regarded as a sort of larger than life personality, not personality, but in the job itself. Very big bank, very big risk, very big balance sheet. When he did trades, they moved markets, and great. Okay. That wasn't exactly what I was looking for per se, but it comes with a lot of like, wow, I'm working for this really impactful person. I distinctly remember when I went down there and I didn't know anything about the area or the job or whatever. And this is a little bit about job, but a little bit about the relationship that is subsequently developed. And he took me on a walk around what was like a very, I don't know if anybody's in Charlotte or from Charlotte, but like kind of a weird area of downtown. And we got outside. Next thing you know, we're walking across. This is the first walk I ever met with this guy. And he's like making obscene amounts of money. And I've, hearing these grand stories, and I'm a nobody. And he's interviewing me ostensibly, right? And we're walking around and we crossed this train tracks. And he's like, he said some things that were basically like, it led me to know that like this guy has already thought 10 steps ahead about my career and progression, but he hasn't even hired me, let alone sought like my permission to like go down these paths. And I was like, wow, this guy really like sort of has a vision. And I'm not exactly sure what to do with this, because it feels like it's moved even beyond what I'm prepared for. But, I pretty quickly was able to pick up on like, he wants to hear me push and like, ultimately accepted the job and went down to work for him. And in the first, kind of days, it was like, okay, well, what does that mean? Am I taking more risk? Am I coming up with more ideas? Like, how do I push myself? And and then I, as I did some homework, I learned this guy, okay, he played college football as well. What does he do with his time? He rides, he does, crazy man triathlons. He tries to hurt his, not hurt, but like push his body. Like I got, I'm like, okay. So what I would say is like, it gets back to some of my prior points, doing a little bit deeper homework on an individual and their history and the people around them. I would say like, look at other individuals that, that person is either led or that work for them. So, I mean, look, it's pretty easy to go to somebody if you're in a work setting and say, hey, you've worked for this person before, or you work for them now. What do you think? Right. And you may or may not get a truthful answer, but if you go to 5, 6, 7 people, you're going to get a decent picture. And then you kind of have a sense, okay, well, what is it, what works in talking to that person? And then, it's sort of a mosaic picture. There's not a lot of nuggets of ingenuity in that, but it is paying attention to cues. It is being willing to kind of put yourself out there. And look, I would say, like a lot of things, if you're in a work setting, mentors, especially if they're senior people, like they're not going to be insecure, but be respectful not to put them in a compromising position, right? And meaning like if you're asking them for something that for them to say no to could have consequences or whatever, like let me say it another way. Put yourself in their shoes, right? Put yourself in their shoes and try and understand what they might be hearing. And I know you don't know their life background from somebody like yourself when you're coming to ask, and what would matter? What do you think would be important, right? It's pretty basic, guidance on any relationship. But if you keep that in mind, I think it'll help. And, and then it's a lot of things we talked about. It's being direct and honest and but be patient is the other thing we haven't talked about. I say this to people from a career perspective, but it's also probably relevant here. Know when to be patient and know when to be impatient. Like, I'm not trying to be contradictory or confusing, but there is a difference, right? And you have to be able to tell with an individual, like these types of things aren't developing, why they're either responding to my requests or they're not. But over time, I will tell you the most powerful relationships are those that develop over years, not weeks and months. So if you think, that this might be somebody that could be a mentor for a long period of time, 2 months going silent, like, is not a long time. It seems like an eternity when you're in college, I know, but like, it's not, you have to be patient.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the key things and what you're going to is, and I like exactly where you went, it's the way to read and build it. It's not the path that it is read and built. And that's because, and I know we've used the reference here to dating, but it's a pretty apt reference, is that, right, if you think back in the last relationships you've had, they didn't all follow the same path. You didn't first go get a Starbucks coffee and then realize that he or she doesn't like that. And next time it's Phil's coffee. And then after that, it's Italian food and then a movie. And it all follows the same progression. Every relationship you have took a different path to get there. What you need to do is be a student of the game. Discipline yourself to pay attention, to plan, try things out, be courageous in 5-minute moments, right? But really pay attention to the cues. It goes back to that old advice a friend of mine gave me when I was lamenting the fact that this relationship wasn't moving and building with this woman I was interested in. He just said, look, Matt, she's just not that into you. And, you know, you may end up trying to woo a mentor and realize, you know what, he or she just isn't that into you. So move on and recognize that's not the end of the game. Now you go on to somebody else.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Tony. We'll shift it over to Q&A just because we only have a few minutes left in the hour. Io, I'd seen that you had raised your hand earlier. If you still have a question, would love to welcome you to introduce yourself and ask. Otherwise, we can go on to Daniel.
My question was actually very directly related to what was just spoken about. It was going to be relating to, you know, in forming that relationship. Obviously, it can take time to sort of get things off the ground and running. And is there ever a point where you sort of realize that you sort of don't want to invest too much in something where breakthrough isn't going to happen without sort of detracting from anyone's time, but at the same time not kind of giving up on the relationship?
Yeah, I think that's where you need to pay attention to the clues, right? For the mentee, it's just, you get to some point where you realize with certain people, you're kind of pushing on a wet noodle and it's just not going to move. Or to Ross's point, you may pick up some cues that this person might not actually be coming from the kind of moral center and experience that would be of value. And so just recognize to some degree, it's a bit of a numbers game, right? You're going to do your best to select the right person, but they're not always going to be the right person. From the mentor perspective, I think actually one of the biggest things, once you've gotten over the fact that there's some simpatico, you enjoy it, and really you need to enjoy the other person. It has to have the makings of a friendship, I think, to stand the test of time. But there's no sooner way to kill a mentor progression than if the mentee fails to listen, fails to try to put in action the advice they're given, and or perhaps does it, but in no way reflects back to the mentor that it ever happened. Because then that core underlying dynamic of the mentorship relationship is broken.
Right.
Thank you.
Matt, I actually recall you had told me that in our first meeting, and so I make it a point. Like every time we meet, there's pieces of advice that you share that I latch onto, and I'm intentional to test it. And as you probably attest to, every time we meet, I say, hey, in our last meeting, these 3 pieces of advice you gave me, I tested them. Here were the results. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll tell you, just a small tactic, and small tactics can be helpful. And Ross has this one down, is not only will he do that, he always comes proactively ready to, 2 or 3 things that I said, and he'll talk about the impact they had and what he did with them. And he weaves it in subtly. He's actually gotten more subtle than when he first approached you, Tony. But the other thing he'll do is just, as you're in the middle of a dialogue and there's a relevant reference back to something you may have talked with each other back 3 weeks ago, Ross will come up with the quote that happened in the room that day. Those kind of cues for a mentor, that's a real rush, because you're like, oh, I'm getting to somebody. You know, what I have to offer is of value.
Right. Tony Ferreira, I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. My name's Tony. I'm from NYU. Thank you guys so much for coming today. I couldn't make it on time, unfortunately, but I caught you right at the reverse feedback part, Matt. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I was just wondering, like the stuff about your wife that your mentor told you and all that stuff that you said was going wrong in your life. How did you use that to encourage you instead of discouraging you?
Oh, it was a fire in the belly. And I think like all of you, you're successful. And I think one of the cores to anybody who's successful is that challenges are fuel for the fire, right? They're not soil to bury you. And this was something that really opened up my eyes in holding a mirror to me. And guess what? I started working out. I took amazing risks that you might think. Remember, I'm a senior partner at a consulting firm. They work a lot. They travel a lot. I set rules. I said, first of all, I am not going to work weekends other than in extremis. And by the way, even to this day, I almost never work weekends anymore. I said that when I am in town, I will be home at 5 o'clock so I can be with my little boys and my wife. I'm going to work out almost every day, 6 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of commitment and investment came from that mirror being held up. And I won't say I'm been perfect and effective at all of it, but I'm leading a life now that I find aspirational. I like it.
Great. That's interesting. Thank you.
And Tony, if you want to go for a bike ride, I'll kick your ass up a hill too.
All right.
Really quick, one last question. We'll wrap up. Daniel, I see you have your hand up. You want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
My name is Daniel. I'm a Master of Quantitative Finance student at Oklahoma State University. My question is, assuming if you like, there are certain people I meet in the industry, and I find that these are like people I want to like follow after, especially in the field of quantitative finance, where you don't have a lot of experts or in that field, but like you try to reach out to them, you email them, like you meet at a meeting, they seem very interested in you. Maybe you show them your work and they're interested. But after that meeting, you try to email them and it takes like ages and then they never get back to you. How do you make sure that you are not bothering them too much? Like what should be the communication style be? When is too much and how do you find a balance?
Tony, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this earlier too. And Daniel, thanks for your question. I think it's a good one. We've spent a lot of time in the last 48 minutes or whatever talking about things that are very sort of deep and personal, and all these things. Oftentimes, what you're looking, I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but oftentimes it's okay to say, look, I want career advancement out of a relationship, right? So I think one thing that's important when you're approaching anyone is defining for yourself what it is you're looking for and being honest, number one, with yourself, right? So it's totally okay that, you want to develop a relationship with, somebody who's an expert in a field, or perhaps a boss or not, or whatever, to help advance your career, right? You are early in your careers, you are ambitious people, you're going to be successful. That is not only expected, but it's very natural. What you've heard from Matt and I for the last hour is those things evolve over time. And as you, have other interests in life and family but my point is, it's okay to define that. So number one, sort of try not to confuse a lack of mentorship, engagement with not getting what it is you're looking for. If what it is you're looking for is to try and learn from them and engage professionally. On that point, I would say, and I've given this advice to people, this is a tricky one, but what I will say is if you want something, don't take no for an answer, right? As a general rule of thumb in life, go get it. Now, I'm telling you that after having just said for an hour, if you come and call me every day for 6 weeks, I'm not going to answer your call. But like, I have a friend, and I'll tell you this one, just so you have a little nugget. Like I have a friend who was a senior in college. Actually, we worked together at Goldman Sachs, our first analyst job coming out of college in '99. And, this was at the top of the NASDAQ bubble before things popped. Anyway, he emailed and called the senior managing director partner at Goldman Sachs, who was running technology research, and some big wig guy, literally every week for 6 months until the guy said, "Uncle, I'm giving you the job," right? Like he willed his way into Goldman Sachs. So my point in saying that is from a career advancement perspective, and I tell this to people, especially folks your age, that like, I don't know what you want to do. And I'm not saying that Wall Street is the right path or consulting or business or whatever for folks, but like, my motivational point to you is, if you want something, go get it. If you're trying to defend, sort of develop a relationship, what you've heard from us for the last, hour is to have that sense of, okay, you got to be a little more, try a different tactic or, try a different angle. I would say, there's always ways to kind of surprise and impress somebody by sharing a nugget of information or something relevant. But anyway, so I don't know if I'm totally answering your question, Daniel. I'm kind of answering two different questions. What I've sort of heard from you is I'm interested in quantitative finance. There's experts in the field. I'm thinking about a job. Yes, you can annoy people by having too much, but what I will tell you is, as a general thumb, like if you're a go-getter, like there are a lot of go-getters out there. And so persistence, relevance, preparedness, all those things are sort of things that I would encourage.
I actually think you nailed that, Tony. I'd say as well, Ross, I think you have a flavor to that I've actually never met anybody as good as you at this pleasant persistence. That, I'm fairly busy and I don't always get back to you with the first time that you reach out, but maybe you could talk to them a little bit about how is it when you shoot me a text or an email and I don't respond first go, or we have a meeting and I maybe can't make it, how do you then work your own mental algorithm to say, when do I reach out again and in what way? Because I've got to say, from my perspective, you do it perfectly.
Well, I'll ask this, Tony and Matt, we're at time. So if you have 5 more minutes, I'm happy to chime in and then wrap us up. Is that all right?
I'm good with it.
Yeah, I'm good on time. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. Yeah, so that happens with almost all of my mentors. People who are senior leaders, I think there's a few things. There's just some baseline reality, accepting, okay, you're busy. Just because you don't call me back the same day I call you, or if you call and we can't connect for a week, I don't take it personally, right? I've in my own life have had people reach out, even as Scholars of Finance, and it might be 5 days before I can get back to them or before I prioritize that, because there's so many other demands in my time that are urgent or important. Of course, all the students in SOF are important to me, but don't take it personally. Put yourself in the person's shoes. Be patient. And usually I'll just take a gauge. I'll gauge. For me, it's, okay, I've tried to call. Okay, I'll send a follow-up text. And I'll kind of think, okay, I just tried a week ago. It's been a week between attempts and we haven't still connected. I'm going to let this cool for 2 weeks. I'll kind of extend the cooling periods a little bit more and more. Once I get to like, hey, you haven't heard from me in 3 weeks, I might dial in again and kind of go back to that cadence of like, hey, I'll try you, and then I'll try again 3 days later. It's kind of intuitive. I'll change channels. If I texted you 3 weeks ago and didn't hear back, or a week ago and didn't hear back, I'll shoot you an email. If I've asked 3 times, hey, Tony, can we meet? I really need to talk. And all 3 times, like, hey, yeah, it'll happen soon. It'll happen soon. It'll happen soon. And it hasn't happened yet. I'll say, okay, Tony's probably oversubscribed right now. I'm going to try to help him right now. So that's when I shift to sending Tony, leadership articles that I know you appreciate, Tony. Matt, when I'll send you that article about J&J, and I'll shift to helping and offering value, right? You said, hey, it's one thing that I want to make that we haven't made yet, I don't believe, is you both have said it's a 2-way street. Like the value is going both ways, but you both frame that by saying, as a mentor, you receive so much value. But what I want to stress is that as a mentee, for me personally, where I've seen mentorship relationships deepen is when I try to proactively add value, not just implicitly or passively in the relationship, right? Where I sent you both, send you a book or send you a gift, send you an article, send you a resource, try to introduce you to someone I think could offer you business value. So that's the other piece is, hey, I'll try to get more time with them. And if that doesn't work, shift into giving and not into taking, out of taking. Those are some points that I would layer on. That's how I think about it to a degree. Yeah.
Well said.
Thanks. Well, with that, I would love to just invite each of you, if you'd like, to just share some closing words, and then I'll wrap up our session.
I guess I'd just say that I think you will find as you invest in it, again, you should view this participating on both sides of the mentorship equation as a lifelong pursuit. If you don't have mentees now, look for some. If you don't have mentors, look for some. Recognize it's a long game. It's a game of numbers and patience to some degree, and a game of fit and relationship. So be a little patient with it. And I'd say it will be, if you do invest in it, and as you get better at it, it'll be one of the most rewarding aspects of your life. And then just as a final note, if any of you want to reach out and chat at some later date, reach out to Ross and he can connect us.
Yeah, very well said, Matt. I would echo everything. I think, being a mentor will teach you a lot about yourself. It'll teach you a lot about what it'll, in many ways make you a better mentee or help you give perspective on what it takes. And it's never, you're never too, young or senior. One example, and it's not me, but I'll share it because people know this person. So, it was Jamie Dimon, who I had worked not directly for at JP Morgan, but I was, had a decent amount of interaction with him as sort of a god within the finance world, I guess. He has said many times that one of his mentors was this guy, Jimmy Lee. Jimmy Lee was an investment banker, a senior investment banker, but that worked for him at JP Morgan. And Jamie would openly say, Jimmy's one of my mentors. Now, I don't know that there was much age discrepancy, but the point is like, how could somebody be Jamie Dimon's mentor other than like, Benjamin Graham or something? But like, it does exist. And so it's not only two-way, it's up and down. Your mentors can be younger than you. It's distinctly possible. We haven't talked about that. There's like these age dynamics, you're all on the younger side relative to Matt and I, but like and so be open-minded about it, be honest about it. And then, I would say similarly, if folks want to reach out, this is something both Matt and I and Ross obviously take very seriously. I know there's a program that you've instituted with Scholars of Finance. I highly commend the organization for doing that. It is not easy, but it is, I've seen this and tried this at companies. It's hard to do, but when you do, even if, some of those things clicking together really work. So engage in that. If you're not already, I would, encourage you to sign up and get involved.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate your closing comments. And I want to echo that last point you had made, Tony. I looked at the roster. There are 4 students on this call right now who have given me a breakthrough insight, who have really taught me something, and who I didn't even realize it, but every time we speak, I'm also I have perked ears and am very curious and seeking to learn from them, I think as much or more than they're trying to learn from me, and they probably don't know it. I'm sure everyone on the call will now ping me. If you ping me and you got, and it's you, I'll tell you, I'll divulge, but I never even thought of that myself, Matt and Tony, so thank you. This has been incredibly enlightening. I hope everyone else feels the same way. I just want to shift into closing us out. I think with a few minutes over time, one thing we'd like to do with all of our speakers, Matt and Tony, before we end, is we actually take a group photo, a screenshot of everybody on the line. So if you're open to it, we can just invite everyone to turn their cameras on. Everyone can say cheese, and we can do a screenshot together. We'll take it away.
One of my own. That's good.
Yep. Go ahead, everybody. All right, one more, just so there's so many people on the call.
Jeez.
All righty, there we go.
Yeah, just take one.
Thank you. And with that, everybody, I also want everyone to, again, please unmute your mics, and let's give Tony and Matt a warm thank you, another round of applause for all the insights.
Thank you.
Before everyone signs off, we'll say, Matt, Tony, thank you again for joining us. Just want to thank you on behalf of our entire organization for sharing your wisdom, your insights, your stories, and some good laughs as well. I think for me personally, I'm going to go away and dial up how much time I'm spending mentoring in the next few weeks. And to everybody on this call, I want to encourage you to find a mentor if you haven't already. Get ready for your Scholars of Finance mentor coming if you haven't already been paired. And try to mentor someone yourself. Students, you should see an email in your inbox. We want to try to make the next wave of the National Speaker Series as impactful as possible. We're going to take a brief pause while everyone goes into finals week and transitions into summer. But if you can fill that survey, it takes 3 minutes tops. One of you will win a $20 gift card and have a chance to help us send Tony and Matt a thank you, a bit of a surprise. So please fill that out when you have a chance. Matt, Tony, we'd love to have you back again soon. And in the meantime, wish everybody a healthy and safe week ahead. And let's all go forth and mentor and learn and have character and integrity. Cheers.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Cheers.
Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.